So this is going to be a summary of the religion and non-religion unit. We're going to start off with the look at religious dimensions in human history. So we're going to look at what is a religious worldview, and obviously we've done a fair bit of revision on what a worldview is. It's a perspective, a way in which we interpret and understand the world. A religious worldview is one that incorporates some kind of spirituality or concept of God or gods into that. In terms of the syllabus outcomes, you need to know 3 different kinds of religious worldviews: monotheism, polytheism, atheism. Monotheism, one, mono, God, theism, theos. And so we know that any belief that incorporates the belief in one God is monotheistic. The syllabus dot point specifically says, identify the following expressions in human history. So it's important that we have an example of each one of these religious worldviews. So for monotheism, the belief in one God, the most obvious examples would be the 3 major Abrahamic or Semitic faiths: Judaism, Christianity, Islam. The best way to identify that monotheism within history is to have a very specific example of a monotheistic belief. So, for example, the Christian belief in the Trinity, where God is 3 in 1 and 1 in 3, is monotheistic, as it is a belief that God is culminated into one essence of being. The concept of one God in Judaism is at the forefront of Jewish thinking. Is what sets them apart from other polytheistic religions that were originating at the same time. So you have a very specific understanding of how that comes through. Polytheism, in terms of many gods, many, theos gods. The belief in many gods, in terms of major world religious traditions, is most commonly seen in Hinduism. If you want to get another completely different point in human history, you can have a look at ancient Greek or ancient Roman mythology. And a very specific example of that would be the belief in a god for different causes in ancient Greek mythology, such as a god of war and a god of the sun and a god of the sea and a god of love and a god of this and a god of that. That's a common attribute of polytheism. So you're identifying that particular religious worldview in 2 different historical contexts. So then you're fulfilling that dot point. The last one is animism. The way I remember this is I think of animation. If something's animated, it's not still, it moves, it lives. So that's looking at every aspect of the cosmos and realizing that it's animated. It has a soul, it has an essence, it has a life. And that by participating in the cosmos, by engaging in it, you come to know the world soul. It fits into ideas of Mother Earth, of inner goddesses, of coming to a spiritual worldview by engaging in the natural physical world. And so there's a spiritual essence within natural things. How would you identify this within human history? You could look at many kinds of ancient religious traditions. You could look at Aboriginal spirituality, for example. The dreaming is connected to a sense of place. Sacred stories only make sense within their country, within their land. Ancestors are connected to particular totems and to particular places. And so the concept of the spirituality and the dreaming is totally interconnected with the physical place. And the physical place becomes animated. It has a soul, it has an essence, and it allows people to live the spirituality. It's animistic. Another good example is Shinto. In the Shinto worldview, it revolves around the idea of kami, and kami is something that's found within nature. And if you studied Shinto as your other religious tradition in prelim, it'd be a very good idea to use that as another example as well. So you can define animism, polytheism, monotheism, you understand them as religious worldviews, and you can pinpoint them in history. That's pretty much what you have to do for that dot point. Alright, so the next part is the religious dimension within human history. So if anyone wants to jump in for that, religious dimension, human history, feel free. That's the next dot point.
Religion and history.
Yep. The religious dimension in human history.
Is this part of religion and non-religion?
Yes, this is all religion and non-religion. This whole
Dimension.
conversation.
Religious dimension.
the religious dimension in human history.
Then what was the first one? Religious worldviews.
Religious worldviews. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, with this dot point, it says evaluate the place of the religious dimension in human history. So as soon as you hear the word evaluate, you can infer that there's a greater chance, and this is all probability, none of this is definite, but there's a greater chance that in a HSC exam, this kind of dot point could be used for a 5 marker because you can write more substantially on it. You're going to have to use a higher order of thinking when looking at this. But the first one we're just identifying, we're just listing. This is, or defining and listing. This is what it means, this is where we find it. This is what it means, this is where we find it. In this kind of thing, we really have to push ourselves that little bit further. And so we have to say, evaluate the place of the religious dimension, these religious worldviews, in human history. So how do they affect the course and span of human history? How have they changed the way in which we see the world, the way in which we live our lives? And the syllabus identifies 3 main areas. It says it's affected the course of human history because religion has impacted each and every individual. It's affected the course of history because religion has led to social cohesion. And it's affected the course of history because religion has led to social transformation. So you need to be able to evaluate, in an evaluative way, explain how these 3 facets affect history. Not an easy thing to do. Let's start with meaning and purpose for the individual. How does a religious belief or a religious worldview, be it polytheistic, monotheistic, animistic, how does that worldview change the life of an individual? And the video we watched in relation to this were the Nago land divers, the Vanuatu people. And we saw that the young boys, to enter into manhood, to be recognised in that society, would have to jump off the land diving towers. And that would be a symbol of letting go of their past and then jumping into their manhood, into their new responsibility, and their identity changes. And another little symbolic thing that happens in that ceremony, which is just a bit of interest, is their mother has a childhood toy. And as her child jumps, her mother throws away the childhood toy. And so it all comes out of a religious story of a woman who was escaping a man. And it's got a whole history behind it. You don't need to know the details of it all. But what it tells us is that through this ritualistic action, through this religious worldview, a young boy is given his identity, is shown his place in that world, is formed and enculturated into rights and responsibilities. And so the religious worldview creates meaning and purpose for the individual. We could take that into a more traditional monotheistic sense, and we could say the baptism of children in Catholicism baptizes them into a religious community which forms and shapes their perspective, which enters them into a particular web of relationships. If you have a look at animism, that spiritual ecological awareness changes the way you act environmentally. And so it impacts the individual. And throughout all different points in history, by changing individuals, human societies have changed. Human societies have formed. Culture has been instilled through the impact that religion's had on individuals. That makes sense? So religion creates a sense of purpose and meaning. So that's what you have to be able to prove. You have to evaluate how religion throughout human history makes purpose and meaning for individuals. The next point is social cohesion. And we talked a lot about with social cohesion, we said, well, that's a common story and there's a common code of ethics and there's a common morality. And we looked at sacred texts and we said, if we all share the Bible, I can say things like, the prodigal son or the good Samaritan, and you have an understanding that brings up a cultural idea, even for non-Christians. Because there's some religious identity at the foundation of our society, there's a commonality there, there's a cohesion, and we have a sense that these things are good. That this forms somehow our cultural understanding of goodness. We have a sense that as part of a Catholic school, we have a sense that by going to Mass on particular days, on going through particular rituals and particular feasts, it brings us together. It's stuff that we do together. It's stuff that makes us one. It's stuff that unites us, gives us a sense of belonging. And so rituals, sacred texts, shared ethics, shared purpose, a desire to spread the gospel, whatever that means, however you might do that, is a common purpose, who people live out very differently. One person sharing the gospel, another person sharing the gospel, live it out in two completely different ways. But they have that common purpose, which unites them. It gives them a sense of cohesion and belonging. And so by creating social cohesion through common story, common ritual, common ethics, through examples such as the Bible or the Torah or the Quran, or through whatever it may be, you to get a sense of social continuity, a continuing story, a shared story. I can go to Mass here, I can go to Mass in Venezuela or Africa or wherever I want to go to Mass, and I can get a sense of continuity, I can get a sense of belonging. And so there's a cohesion even within the global community. And that adds to a dynamic within history, because it allows you to identify a group of people, identify where you fit in the long strand of human history. You get to know yourself better because of where you come from. And this goes into the third point now. If all religion ever did was conserve things of the past, told you where you fit and made you redo it time and time and time and time again, religion would inevitably die, because it would not stay fresh, it would not stay relevant, it would not stay meaningful. And so religion must be transformative. In that, two things. Religion must transform with the times and adapt to new contexts, and religion must challenge. If a religion is centered on things like peace and justice and equity and love and compassion and being radical and being countercultural, which many key religious figures are from many different religions, then that message must be reinvigorated into each period in time. If you look at contemporary times, things like euthanasia, things like abortion are key religious issues. Things like the role and place of homosexuality in society, they're things that challenge and transform, and religion interacts with. And different religious views go different ways, and it's a challenge for our time. Things like interreligious dialogue. How do you deal with the other in a globalized society? People didn't have that issue of globalization years ago, but now they do. And how does religion respond to that? Looking at globalization again, we can now really see the difference between the world's wealthiest and the world's poorest. How does religion respond to that? Jesus and Muhammad, they didn't have a concept of distribution of wealth as we have it today. But they did have a concept of the oppressed and marginalized in society. So how do we put this social reality of today in with the values that these key religious figures held? And how does religion challenge society to transform? You can look at the work of charities, you can look at the work of social justice advocates. How has religion formed these people? You can have a look at Martin Luther King. Very religious man, very passionately looking to transform the world he lived in. And so religion inspires people to conserve and put traditional values into new situations, to change the society that they live in. And the society that a religion is put in challenges that religion to become relevant, challenges that religion to recontextualize itself. So how does religion affect human history? It affects every single individual in the way that they make meaning, the way that they belong, and the way they see their purpose. How does it create social cohesion? By sharing a common story, by giving you an ability to locate yourself within a history. Say, I'm part of this group which has been around for 2,000, 4,000, 6,000 years, however long. And I understand that these people 1,000 years ago are actually part of my story. Or these people, in the case of Aboriginal spirituality, 30,000 years ago, were a part of my story. And that story continues, and I keep reinterpreting that and reliving that, reliving that. Lost my words. And then, as I relive this, recontextualize this, make this my own, I transform it. Social transformation. So they're the three key aspects. Right. Next thing we have to look at Next thing we're doing, girls, is the global distribution. If anyone wants to jump in, so where each religion comes from, what countries, that kind of stuff.
What's it called? Sorry.
Global distribution of major religious traditions. So for this section, you have to have a general world picture. Where are different world religious traditions dominant in different places? That one there. Shirley, do you need that seat there?
Oh, no, that's a seat. That's all right. I'm just
Sure.
Sure.
It's okay. It's alright. Ruined my podcast. It's ridiculous. Now, okay, so what we have to be able to determine is what we have to know, and the best way to do this is to have it's the map on the back wall. To have those colours in your head, to know the general patterns. And once you know the general patterns, you can then kind of work out the specifics after that. So let me go through a few of the general patterns of the way that religion is distributed around the world. Okay. Alright. So, if you have a look at the Americas to start, all of the Americas, North and South, are Christian dominated to different extents. So you know that whole section of the world is completely Christian in terms of the dominant religion in each country. So if you got a multiple choice question saying, identify the three, A, B, C or D, which one are all three countries Christian dominated? If there was a South American country or a North American country, you know, okay, well that's definitely, tick that off, Christian for sure. So you get a sense of that whole part of the world is Christian. If you look at Africa as a continent, you know that anything in the northern half of Africa is Muslim, anything in the southern half of Africa is Christian. Yeah, it's on canvas and it's everywhere. It's on the it's in activity. It's in the activity that's on this. It's the third link. And then if you follow that up, you know, North Africa connects to the Middle East. And so the Middle East is also predominantly Muslim. There's one exception in the Middle East that isn't Muslim. What is it? Anyone know? Israel, very good, with Judaism. So the only country in the world where Judaism is dominant is in Israel. But it's a funny little statistic because the largest Jewish population in the world doesn't live in Israel. Where does the largest Jewish population live? America. Very good. And it's simply because America has such a large population that they can have a small percentage of Jews and still have more Jews in Israel. But in terms of, so all the Middle East, with the exception of Israel, has a dominant Muslim population. And if you think of Islam, it originates in Saudi Arabia and then spreads out into the Middle East and tries to get all the way up to Europe. And so you know that Middle Eastern and North African area, because of where Islam originated, also still continues to have a strong Islamic presence. As you go through Europe, you know, Europe is predominantly Christian-centered. Almost all of Europe is predominantly Christian. The Asia-Pacific one is a very interesting region. That is not, we can't really categorize that into regions. And so you need to know our closest neighbours. You need to know a few very specific examples. Some good ones to know. India is a centre for Hinduism. Vietnam for Buddhism, and Vietnam's important because in the 70s after the Vietnam War, we had a lot of Buddhist migration to Australia, which increased our Buddhist population. Indonesia is a Muslim country, and one of the reasons why that's important is because with it being a Muslim country, people from the Middle East can actually go to Indonesia on holiday visas quite easily, overstay those holiday visas, and then seek asylum in Australia from that. And so that has an effect on our Muslim population. So this is like study notes that are helping you with two different sections here. This can help you with religious trends in post-1945, and it can help you with global adherence in religion and non-religion. The Philippines is a bit of a Christian centre among all these other religious traditions. Thailand's quite dominant with Buddhists, and there's a few of the other island nations you can look into as well. I would say know a few examples of our closest neighbours in the Asia-Pacific region. Papua New Guinea, I'm pretty sure it's Christian, but don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure. With study notes on this, remember what it's going to be. You're going to more than likely, if it's a 5-marker, which it normally isn't, but if it is a 5-marker, you're more than likely going to be asked about trends, about large areas. You're not going to be asked to discuss the religious makeup of Cuba. It's probably not, it could, but it's not going to happen. And the reality is you're more than likely going to get 2 or 3 multiple choice max on this kind of thing, or maybe if you're unlucky, 1 5-marker. It's not worth memorising the religious adherence of every single country in the world, because it's disproportionate to what you're going to be asked. Know the general trends and know the logic behind it. And using that logic, you can start to make inferences and work out those tricky kind of questions. It's not worth memorising humongous amounts of information for what essentially is going to get you 2 or 3 marks. So know the Asia-Pacific region well, and then know the general trends in all the other regions, and you can kind of bring it together. The other important thing to do is to know where the major... So you could even pick, in the textbook it talks about the 2 largest Jewish populations, the 2 largest Buddhist, the 2 largest Hindu. Know the 2 or 3 largest populations for each religion.
So Buddhism, Christian, Hinduism, Islam, and Jewish.
Yeah, Judaism. Yeah. That's it. And so know where the 2 or 3 largest populations of those are in the world, because when you get a question, the examiners will look at those largest ones and ask you for the big picture kind of stuff, not the, little kind of African country that you don't know whether it's central or north or south. They don't generally go for those kind of things.
I hope not.
So do I. Exactly. No, if they do, the most you're going to lose is 1 mark. And it's not worth studying pages and memorising pages and pages of stats for 1 mark. So know the trends and then use your common sense from there. Just have make sure you've got a good general world map in your head, that you know where everything is and what colours they are, and then you can put it together. The other thing you need to know is the breakdown of religion around the world. So 31.5% are Christians. Second largest religious population are Muslims at 23%. And then Hindus at 15%. Yeah, it's all on canvas, the pictures are there. But 31%, 31.5% are Christian. So Christian is the largest population, followed by Muslims at 23%. And then Hindus at 15%. There's also 16% unaffiliated, but unaffiliated, just like in the Australian census, where you don't know whether that's agnostic or atheist, or they could be New Age, or they could be a whole range of things. The unaffiliated is like that as well. You're really not sure what unaffiliated is. It's like a big mixed bag of a bit of everything. Humanist, atheist, agnostic, the whole works. So while that's an important statistic, and you have to be aware of it, that it's about 16% of the whole global population, know that it's very vague. Buddhists are about 7%, and a really interesting one to remember is Jews are 0.2%. We often think of Judaism having a really big presence because they're at the foundation of Christianity and Islam, and Christians and Muslims together make up 50% of the world.
So the 0.2 of Jews come from the America and Islam together?
Israel, you mean?
Israel, yeah.
America and Israel would have a big portion of the world's Jews.
But this
Not all of them.
But all of it.
All Judaism combined is 0.2% of the world's population. So
tiny.
And again, there's like we discussed with the Australian census, not all people identify with Judaism on particular censuses because of fears of safety. But even if they did, maybe you could say 0.3, but I don't think you could say that. Like, it's a small number. But the reason why Judaism is so essential on these things is because Islam and Christianity have Jewish heritage. And so Judaism and the Jewish voice is quite loud because of World War II and a few, and like just the way history's come through, the Jewish voice is still very prominent in a lot of global issues. Okay, new religious expression. Yep. So this is New Age religion. Now, I'm just very conscious of time as well, so I'm going to go a bit quick here. Okay. We've got 18 minutes to do 3 more dot points.
Well,
Okay, so we've got new religious expression. We've studied New Age in the past, and what New Age is there's a few features to it. It's individual and eclectic. It's individuals looking for spiritual fulfillment. And so there's no one way to be New Age. You might be theistic, you might not be. You might believe in a God, you might not. You might believe in tarot cards, you might believe in astrology, you might believe in natural healing, you might believe in acupuncture, you might believe in some new kind of self-help guru who's just come on YouTube. There's New Age spirituality is broad. You might go back to folk religions and believe in what the Vikings believed in. You might be Nordic. You might reinterpret parts of Aboriginal spirituality if you really wanted to. It is broad. And there is no one New Age community. There's no one definition of what a New Age person should believe. But there are features. They're eclectic. They gather. They get bits and pieces from different spots, some new, some old. So it's not all going back to ancient religions, and it's not all getting New Age self-help healer kind of people.
They are a
Eclectic.
collective.
ECCLECTIC. Eclectic, yeah. And so it's about bringing different religious aspects together in order to find personal and individual fulfillment. And so what this does, in an age where traditional religious expression is no longer as satisfying, we live in, and again, we go back to this idea of consumerism and globalization. We live in a culture that's open to choice. We live in a culture where you're brought up, where you're brought up to look around. When you're brought up in a plural society, where you can go down to Strathfield and you can see people from all over the world with any kind of religious faith you could imagine in one shopping centre. And so the idea that we live in a monoculture, a culture dominated by a single faith, no longer exists. It's no longer our reality. We can Google any religious tradition we want, so why should we close our eyes off to the rest of the world and pick one? That's the thinking behind it. And in a society and a way of life where we're so open to finding the thing that fits us best, the thing that's most beneficial for me, the thing that's most rewarding for me, why would I settle for less? If I go to church and I'm bored, I'll just leave the church. Where in the past that attitude wouldn't have been there. But we're in a society that expects gratification, that expects to be fulfilled. And if we don't get it, we go elsewhere. And so this tendency leads to the rise in these New Age traditions. So what do these New Age traditions do? Well, they do what traditional religions did. And the dot points you have to know is seek personal fulfillment, seek ethical guidelines, and clarify relationship with society. So basically, what it's saying is that New Age spiritualities fulfill the same role, or attempt to fulfill the same role that traditional religions did in a different context. So they look for the idea of personal fulfillment and look for the idea of ethical guidelines. How do I live well? How do I find spiritual fulfillment? How do I feel at one with the universe? How do I answer life's enduring questions? All those things that we would commonly associate to traditional religion. It's saying, well, if I've rejected traditional religion, but I've still got all these longings and desires and these yearnings, what do I do now? And so they say, and so people look around. And this concept of New Age comes about. And there's an individualistic, choice-orientated, eclectic way of meeting those same needs. Finding your place in society, fulfilling your personal fulfillment, seeking purpose and meaning, clarifying ethics, getting a sense of self in a way that is not connected to traditional religion, but is not disconnected from the spiritual. So that's the first thing you have to do. You have to look at internal and external. So we just looked at internal. What internal drivings make me consider New Age spirituality? My need to be fulfilled, my need for ethical guidance, and my need to be part of society. The whole thing about life's enduring questions, all that stuff. What external factors, things from the outside world, have led me to this point? That's the next dot point. And I have to be able to explain this. And it says here, the rise of materialism, scientific progress, ecological awareness, and disenchantment with traditional religion. And you can get these out of the syllabus. So the rise of materialism. If we're looking at a more consumeristic, materialistic culture, we're looking at one that is, like I said before, expects instant gratification. And so the idea of a New Age religious tradition, a New Age religion spirituality, is one where we can do that, where we can find and practice it, fulfills us, and do it for 6 months, and if we get bored of it, go to another one. Scientific progress. Many of the past understandings that are connected with traditional religious traditions have been either disproven or are outdated by scientific understanding. And so we need new ideas of religion that are more in touch with our scientific understandings. And hence many New Age spiritualities are centered around particular understandings of nature that are kind of interwoven with scientific understandings of nature. Growth in ecological awareness. Many New Age spiritualities are animistic or draw on other animistic traditions. And so as we become more ecologically aware, more environmentally aware, we move towards these other kind of practices. And a disenchantment with traditional religious practices. I was Catholic, but I don't really agree with the Church's stance on abortion or birth control or on homosexuality or this or that. And it's really starting to turn me off. But I'm still spiritual. I still believe in God. But this doesn't really work for me. That's the kind of attitude you're looking at.
Oh, I thought that was you.
No, it's not me. No, it's not me.
No, I was like, oh, okay.
No, I'm saying that this idea of disenchantment with traditional religious practice, that's the kind of attitude you're looking at. Like people who will say, well, I still believe it. I'm not rejecting this premise of God, but the morality of this church doesn't work for me. Or I'm bored in church. The smells and the bells and the candles and the incense. It's and these 500-year-old paintings. It's like, what is this? This has nothing to do with 2013. And so I become disenchanted, and it just doesn't meet my needs. And so rather than looking for ways of meeting my needs within that religion, I say, well, I'll just look elsewhere. And so the external factors that lead to the rise in New Age: materialism, consumer culture, scientific progress, ecological awareness, disenchantment with traditional religion. So when we look at New Age religious expressions, we realize it's eclectic and individual. There's internal and external pushes. The internal ones seek for fulfillment, ethical guidelines, clarify relationship in society, and the external ones, materialism, scientific progress, ecological awareness, disenchantment with traditional religions. We have to explain those relationships. Make sense? Yeah. A lot of dot points to remember, but again, if you get the broad concept in your head, you get the language of it, these particular dot points will start to come naturally. You have to get the picture of it in your mind, of what's actually happening. All right. So non-religious worldviews. Agnosticism, atheism, humanism. Outline them. What are they? Agnosticism, agnostic. A means no, gnostic means knowledge, no knowledge. I don't know. Not I reject, not yes there is, not no there isn't, I don't know. Anyone who starts to have a firm belief about the supernatural either way is not agnostic. An agnostic person is someone who does not know, who says I cannot know, or I don't know yet. That's agnostic. Maybe I know one day, not now. Could be a God, might not be a God. Often agnostics are sided with atheists and they kind of put on the same kind of thing. I don't think that's necessarily correct, because it really is a genuine not knowing. Not a probably not, but I'm open to the idea. Atheism, no. Theos, God, no God. I am positive, I'm certain there is no God. Notice the difference. Not I reject God, not I don't like God, not a good God wouldn't allow this to happen. There is no God. If you reject God, or you have a dislike or a hatred of God, that's called apostasy. That's not atheism. Atheism is saying not I reject God, because then you're kind of affirming God's there to reject. You're saying I reject the idea of a God. There is no God. I reject the notion that there is a God, because there is no God. And I'm pretty certain of that, and you're not going to change my mind. Atheistic, no God. And then we have humanism. Whenever you think of humanism, think of your two arms. One arm, you have rationality, science, logic, reason. Human endeavour, the stuff that makes you rational. On the other arm, you have compassion, empathy, common humanity, hence the name humanism. And so when those two things come together, a shared humanity, empathy, compassion, logic, reason, progress, understanding, you have humanism. Humanism is not just the logic and reason. If I'm a logical, reasonable, rational person, and everything I do I think scientifically about, but I have no morality and I have no care for you because it's all about me, I'm not a humanist. I can be as logical and rational as I want, I'm not a humanist. A humanist must equally be ethical. A humanist recognises we all share a common human nature and we're all part of the common human family, and therefore we must be good. Now, there's two different kinds of humanism we look at the syllabus. Very hard to distinguish. And the more you read into these things, the even harder they become to distinguish. But there's rational humanism and scientific humanism. The difference is scientific humanism has a more ethical push. So while rational humanism comes to ethical outcomes, its starting point is more logical, is more rational. But the difference between scientific humanism and rational humanism is that there's two things. Scientific humanism focuses particularly on the scientific method. So how do I be logical and rational? By using the idea of hypothesis, test, conclusion, retest. I use the scientific method to be rational. The other thing about scientific humanism is that it is absolutely focused on ethics. It almost separates the reason and the ethics and says those two things work together. Where for a rational humanist, the ethical position comes out of the logic. So there's a greater emphasis on ethics and an emphasis particularly on the method of the scientific method to be reasonable in scientific humanism, where rational humanism is less focused on ethics, but is still ethical, and uses any kind of logic and reasoning, as opposed to having a particular focus on scientific logic and reasoning. So very minute differences. Again, the differences between rational and scientific, you might be asked in a 5-marker outline the differences, but not likely. But that's the avenue that you take. Again, remember that quote I told you, the science with a conscience, technology with a heart. Was that it? Both at the service of humanity. And don't forget the both at the service of humanity. So it's taking dry, cold, hard fact and making it human, giving it a face, giving it a heart, giving it eyes, giving it lips and a mouth, and giving it breath. So you take what is observable and logical and make it real, make it lived, make it part of the human family. We share a common human nature. And then we have to be able to take each one of those particular worldviews, atheism, agnosticism, humanism, and we have to say, how does this affect the aspirations and behaviour of individuals? Now, we did that fairly, I think, comprehensively in class.
Yeah.
We've got 4 minutes. No one else, we're all good with not going over
Just
that?
the last point.
Yeah, the last point is really like.
The comparison?
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. You'll notice there's a new image on the back wall as well, which is a very simple comparison of the two. So, let me explain this to you well. You have to take a religious worldview and the non-religious worldview. Religious one we've taken is monotheism, non-religious is humanism. You don't have to take these. I think these are the best ones to take. So I'll just go through these. And you have to look at them in terms of transcendence, the human person, and social responsibility. Transcendence. The idea of transcendence is anything that is beyond human comprehension. Okay? Say that again. The idea of transcendence is anything that is beyond human comprehension. And so if you're a monotheist, think about Christian, Islam, Judaism. Now, you know what I'm saying. My idea of transcendence is that God is transcendent. So if I have an experience of unbelievable love, or if I'm totally amazed by creation, I'm in awe and I go, oh my gosh, that revealed God. I've had an experience of God. And so I feel this transcendent. I feel this thing that I can't explain this. I'm just amazed. I'm overwhelmed. And I say, this is evidence that God exists. I've just had this experience of God's love. I've had a conversion experience. I'm like St. Paul who's seen the light on the way to Damascus. I was over the top. I'm just like, oh my gosh, I've had an experience of transcendence. And that experience of transcendence, of that which is above and beyond, equates to, or leads into our understanding of who or what God is. If I'm a humanist, and this is the really interesting position, they say that, well, it's undeniable, it's fact. Human beings experience the transcendent. If you stand on the edge of a cliff and look out over the ocean and you're amazed, you're experiencing something bigger than what you can understand. If you're an astronomer and you look and you study the depths and the length and breadth of space, and you realise that everything is so massive, and you realise that time goes back 13.7 billion years, and who knows how much further it's going to go ahead, and you realise that time and space are relative, and then if I do this and you're just amazed, like you just look at all these scientific facts, and you think, how can all this work? And you just get overwhelmed by it. The humanist says, well, that's an experience of the transcendent. You're experiencing something beyond human comprehension. And so the experience of the transcendent is something that is natural and explainable. Because just because you're a humanist doesn't mean you have to think that human beings can comprehend and contain and understand every single aspect of everything. You can still have experiences of the transcendent. You can still be overwhelmed by the love for your child, because that is transcendent. That is beyond the words that you have the capacity to use to explain it. Okay, the human person. The interesting thing is both humanists and monotheists come to the same conclusion. We're all equal. We all have common basic human rights, and we all have dignity. We all have worth and value. I'll finish off. How do we get, if you have to get a bus, then you can go. Ladies, if you're going to leave, just leave quietly so I can just finish this, please. And I'll have a nice weekend. So with the human person, you're going to say, you get to this conclusion that we're all equal, and there's something common about all of us, we all have dignity. But the humanist would say that this is because we share a common human nature. This is because there's something between all of us that is the same. And that's how humanity, we have a shared humanity, that's the key word. A monotheist would say, why do we have a shared humanity? Why are we all equal? Because we're made in the image of God. Whether you're Christian or whether you're atheist, I believe that you're made in the image of God. I believe that at your origin is a single being, is a single transcendent being, is divine, is some kind of divinity. And because we share that divine origin, we share that worth, we share that innate dignity and all those kind of things. And so the end point's the same. We're dignified, worthwhile, good, equal creations. But the how we got there are two very different ways. The social responsibility is the same. The humanists will say, well, because we have a shared human nature, we're all part of a shared human family. And therefore, we're responsible to each other. From that shared humanity comes a responsibility to say, if your dignity is being diminished, I have to look after it. If your rights are being taken away, I have to defend them. Whereas the Christian would say, well, because you're made in the image of God, and because I've been given the 10 Commandments, and because I have the 5 pillars, and because I have the Beatitudes, and because Jesus did this and that, I have a mandate, I have a responsibility to do this for you. And so the outcome is the same. the outcome is I need to respect and look after your dignity. I have to work toward justice and peace. The outcome is the same, but the starting point is different. Because the starting point for the monotheist is that God set these things forth in the sacred text, that God modelled these things, however that may be for that particular person, whether it be through Jesus or through Muhammad or through the commandments or through Moses or whoever. It's that God has revealed this truth to us, that we should be responsible to each other. And that there's an idea that in the afterlife we'll be judged on how we upheld our social responsibility. There's an idea that we'll be held accountable for what we do. So the reasons why we're socially responsible, there's definitely overlap. We're also socially responsible because we all have dignity, and that's exactly the same. But there's a bit more to it. So the outcome is the same. We're responsible for each other. We're equal. We look at when we defend justice and equality and all those things. We show compassion. But the starting point is different. So for a human person and social responsibility, outcomes are the same. Starting point is different. For transcendence, different understandings of the same experience. Too easy?
Yep.
Have a very
Thank you
nice
so
weekend.
much.